You didn't lose your value, the language just changed. You're looking at a job description for something you've done 1,000 times, something you could do in your sleep, and you realise you don't recognise half the words they're using to describe the role. You've got 30 years of genuine battle hardened experience, and they want a strategic facilitator of digital transformation. It feels like trying to use a map of London to navigate Manchester, but none of the names match anymore. You start to wonder if your skills have an expiry date, but ability doesn't decay. What's happened is a translation failure. It becomes clear that the very thing making you feel out of date is actually a level of judgment the current system isn't designed to handle. But to understand why they can't see your value, you have to look at the digital wall that sits between your CV and an actual human being. In the UK, we've moved away from hiring people who can do the work towards hiring people who can signal the intent. Someone applies for a role where they have 10 times the experience required, and then nothing, not even an automated rejection. The reality is that your CV probably never reached a human desk. It was stopped by an algorithm, an applicant tracking system designed to scan for keywords. This AI doesn't have the life experience to know that managed to site turnaround is the same thing as operational life cycle optimization. It's a binary machine. If the specific buzzword isn't there, the person doesn't exist. You are describing outcomes, saving a project or managing a crisis. It's looking for agile, scrum, or stakeholder management. They aren't looking for the builder. They're looking for someone who talks like an architect. The interface the market uses to read talent has become too shallow to process 30 years of depth. And 3 decades of work has made you a far more complex shape than a standard algorithm can categorize. And that complexity isn't just a software issue, it's actually the reason human managers have started to view your experience as a hidden cost. There is a reason why deep experience has started to feel like a liability. It's because you become an expensive asset. And I'm not talking about the salary, I'm talking about judgment. The system doesn't necessarily want the technician who can find the one loose cable in a rack of 1,000 and get the network back up in 10 minutes. That man is a lifesaver, but he's expensive to a modern manager because he knows his worth. He's seen enough bad decisions to know when a new initiative is going to fail. To a modern corporate structure, your judgment is often framed as friction. They don't want someone who can see the cracks in the foundations. They want compliance. They want someone who will follow the documented process without pointing out that the process was written by someone who has never actually done the job. A younger worker is safe because the process is all they have. You, on the other hand, have a low tolerance threshold for nonsense. In the modern office, that isn't seen as an asset, it's seen as being difficult to manage. This creates a massive gap between what you can actually do and what the market thinks it needs. The people who know how the engine actually works are being replaced by people who know how to present a graph of the engine's theoretical performance. In a previous role, I watched the company bring in external consultants to solve problems we'd already identified a long time prior. They'd arrive with expensive suits and even more expensive laptops, present a deck that said exactly what everyone had been shouting for years. They were all process and no actual change. The system, though, values the consultant because the consultant speaks the new language. They provide assurance through terminology. They are hired to document the work. Well, you were hired to do the work. Trying to pivot into a junior version of a new trend after 30 years of more senior roles feels ridiculous because it is. It's like trying to run a heavy duty engine on the wrong fuel. So when the phone stops ringing and the language doesn't fit, you're left with a choice. Do you keep shouting into the void, or do you change the way you're standing? When the translation fails and the silence sets in, the first move is containment. When I see a job ad written by an AI about stakeholder journeys and synergistic alignment, I've had to learn not to take it personally. That ad isn't a map of a human being. It's a list of corporate signals. It's a filter designed to find people who are willing to speak that specific dialect. If you don't fit through that filter, it doesn't mean you're broken. It means the filter is too small for what you carry. In the UK, we're brought up to believe in a meritocracy. We think if we work hard, the system will recognise our quality. But when the system stops speaking your language, waiting for it to notice you just leads to drift. You have to stop looking for validation from a system that doesn't have the sensors to recognise your quality. The silence you're experiencing isn't a rejection of 30 years of work. It's the sound of a system that has become so detached from reality that no longer knows how to talk to the people who actually built it. And once you stop trying to force the old plug into a new socket, then you can finally see the reality of your situation. Experience doesn't expire. It just becomes harder to trade in a market that's obsessed with cheap compliant components. You aren't out of date, you're just overspecified for what the current buyers are asking for. It's like being a master carpenter in a world that only wants flat pack furniture. The flat pack stuff is easier to ship and requires no skill to assemble, but it doesn't mean the carpenter has lost his touch. It just means the market has decided to settle for something more temporary. The language changed, the labels changed, but the work, the actual tangible ability to make things happen, that hasn't moved an inch. You haven't lost your edge. You've just reached a point where you're too sharp for the blunt instruments they're using to measure you. You don't need to blunt the tools just to fit their toolkit. Their career was built on their dialect. Whatever happens next will be built on your judgment. I'll see you next time.